Ahoy hoy! I am Planarwalk, and welcome to a creation and welcome to a evolution versus creationism debate. Let me just switch over to everything so that we've got things pulled up. Wrong thing. There we go. And today we're with. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Mike. I go by the name Mike Above, as in from the heavens above. And I will be arguing against evolution today.
Okay. And I think everyone knows me, so I think it's good to just jump straight in. So, what is your main arguments against evolution or for creation? For creationism? Where do you want to start?
Evolutionists, as a group, love to go on and on about the fossil record. Now, I have not seen any evidence to show that this record is indeed a record. Fossils are dug up and identified using certain radiometric methods, radiometric methods that cannot be relied upon.
Well, actually, why would you say that you can't rely upon them?
For example, I've seen Kent Hovind in many of his videos talk about they tried dating a rock that they know is only 10 years old, and it comes up with a date of hundreds of thousands of years old.
So, when it comes to certain radiometric dating, because I don't know exactly what type of dating they were using on that particular rock, but when it came to that particular rock, the reason why they were unable to date that rock was simply due to the fact that the dating method that they were using on it wasn't accurate to millions of years. Or, you had a sort of million-year either side variation of what it could be. I can't remember. Or error. Margin of error. Yeah. So.
That's precisely my point.
But it comes down to what method you are using. If you're using something like if you're not told, oh, this is only 10 years ago, or this is from only 10 years ago, you might use those methods that have a million-year margin of error because you think, okay, it's from millions of years ago. If you think that it's from 100 million years ago, then you're likely to try using something that has a margin of error of a million years because, it doesn't really matter if you're 1 million years off when you're dating it back to 100 million years ago.
But that kind of proves my point that you need to know how old the rock is in order to date it. That seems a bit circular.
Well, you use different dating methods for different kind of rocks. So if or for different types of fossils or whatnot. So if you go ahead and date there's certain dating methods that you could use that all give different ones. Like I believe it's argon potassium dating is a really good one to use that would give you different results. Well, it wouldn't give you different results, but it would be more accurate than something like I think it's uranium dating or something like that.
If we have these multiple methods and they give different results, that is exactly why they're not reliable.
Well, the reason, well, it's not that they give different results, it's that they give more accurate results. If you want to date something that's only 10 years ago, well, then you probably want to use something like carbon dating, something that has a much lower margin of error than something like uranium dating.
Oh, you were finished?
Yeah.
The margin of error, it still makes it unreliable. If you can't pick one method of dating and pinpoint the age, you're going to get different answers for the age.
So the reason why you can't pick one method of dating is this. It's the same reason why you wouldn't have one size of screw for, I don't know, if you want to screw in a screw. Don't know why I had trouble with that. But if you want to screw in a screw to something, you don't just pick one size, because sometimes you may need to have a screw that's very tiny to get into to screw something in. But then you might need, for something else, you might have a bigger screw. These screws, some of them will be better for certain situations, but some of them will be better for other situations. You don't use the same thing every time. For example, you're not going to use carbon dating on things that are millions of years old. You're going to use different forms of radiometric dating. And if you want to date something that's billions of years old, you're going to use something that has a higher margin of error, but can actually go back that far. However, if you want to date something that's a bit younger than that, then you might use something that has a lower margin of error, but can't go back as far as the other ones.
And this is why I have the problem. Why, if we have all of these different methods that supposedly do the same thing, they have different. They can go back. One can go back farther than the other. They have different margins of error. It's simply not reliable.
Well, just because something has a margin of error doesn't mean that it's unreliable. Everything will have a margin of error when it comes to science, because we don't have a perfect way. And I just realized something, because because there is no way to completely eliminate margin of error. So margin of error does not mean unreliable. It just means that there's a certain area in which we can't get more accurate than with certain things.
How do you consider that reliable?
Because it's giving us a idea of where in history it happened. Like if I say, I went out at between 6 and 7 last night or something like that, it doesn't mean that there is a margin of error there, right? Between that of about an hour. It doesn't mean that I didn't go out at that time. It's just that there's a time between 6 and 7, and I can't exactly remember it because I don't remember the exact time that I went out. But I can't get more accurate than that.
And I could say to that if you were giving that as a story to police or say as testimony, they wouldn't be able to rely on that because you're giving them such a large error margin.
Well, there is a certain error margin, but if I'm saying, I went out for 5 hours and I went out at a time between 6 and 7, and the murder occurred at 8, then, or if the murder occurred before I went out, let's say, right? Then I could say, well, if I was at home at before 6, then that kind of tells them that, hey, I wasn't out at that time.
For the sake of argument, since you're the one that brought up this analogy, if you say 6 or 7, how can I be sure that you're even correct on that if you can't remember?
Between 6 and 7. So that...
Yes.
Yeah, so that means that there was a...
was so much that you have to say it's between 6 and 7. How can I rely on you for that information?
Because what I'm saying is that there's a time between 6 and a time between 6 and 7 o'clock that I went out. That does not mean that I didn't go out between 6 and 7. All it means is that there was a time between then that I went out.
I just think we're going to have to agree to disagree on this point.
Wait, how does it mean? My question is, if I say that I went out between 6 and 7, why does it not mean that I didn't go out between 6 and 7?
Well, I would argue because you're not sure when between 6 and 7 it was. How can I rely on your memory that it even was between 6 and 7? I'm simply going with the analogy that you gave me.
Yeah, but if I say that, if I remember, I went out between 6 and 7, then I may not remember the exact time. Maybe I went out at 6:25 or 6:37 or something. It doesn't mean that I didn't go out between 6 and 7. It just means that there was a time between 6 and 7. I can't remember the exact time that I went out. It just means that I didn't. It just means that there's a certain time that I went out that I can't remember the exact time.
I think you just made my point for me.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that I didn't go out between 6 and 7.
It also doesn't mean that you did.
But it does, though.
But if you can't remember for sure, how can I trust that? That is my point.
Well, because I know that I went out between 6 and 7. It's not that... the problem is not that I'm completely inaccurate. The problem is that I just can't remember the exact time.
I think this analogy is getting away from the point of
Hold on,
the reading data.
Hold on, I've got a question. Let's say that I did remember. Let's say that it was between 6:45 and 6:46, right? Let's say that it was between those particular things. There's still a margin of error there. It's a much lower margin of error, but there's a margin of error of about a minute. Would you say that means that I can't remember, or just because I can't remember the exact second that I went out, does that mean that I can't use that particular time? Because does that mean that I'm unreliable there?
You're much more precise on that, so I can trust what you say more.
So where is the line between the preciseness and when it has a margin of error that you say, okay, well, this has so much of a margin of error that I can no longer trust any results that it gives?
Well, this is where I think this analogy is getting away.
At Plainer Walk, please may I join?
I'm just going to turn that off.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was.
Oh, that was just the super chats. I sometimes forget to turn them off. Turn off the chat box lady whilst I am streaming.
Oh, okay. What was I saying? That's where I think this analogy is getting away from the point, because being able to narrow down from an hour to a minute of when you left your house is very different from radio dating millions of years to develop a theory that's going to be taught to our children at school.
Well, when it comes to radiometric dating, it's the best method that we have to measure things that are so far in the past. when it comes to radiometric dating, you have... Well, when it comes to dating, you've got carbon dating. Carbon dating can only go back about between 20 to 50,000 years. That's the limit of how far it can go back. When you've got things like uranium dating or potassium argon dating, these things can go back a lot further. And some of them do have a bit of a... I believe it's uranium dating in particular has a... margin of error of 1,000,000 years or something like that. I can't remember the exact margin of error, but it does have a fairly big margin of error. You wouldn't use uranium dating to date something that's 100 years old. You wouldn't use carbon... Likewise, you wouldn't use carbon dating to date something that's millions of years old. And these are the... It's like if you have a screw, right, and you need a screw for a small fitting. You wouldn't use a big one, because even though the big one may be sturdier, the big screw is too big for what you're... Like, if you want to screw something into your computer, you're not going to use a giant screw, because that would be too big, even though it's sturdier.
Well, then help me understand that, because with your screw analogy, the screws are obviously different sizes, and that's why you would choose a different one. But these radio dating processes, how are they all... how do they all go back different amounts of time? How do they all give different margins of error if it's the same thing?
So that's because that's because it's measuring...
To say this one is for recent things and this one is for more ancient things.
Well, that's because it's using different margins. Shit. I had said margins of error so many times that I keep on saying it. That's because it's using different isotopes and different or different things, different elements that decay at different rates. So when it comes to certain elements, they'd have different half-lives. And so uranium, like we can bring up the half-life of uranium. So the half-life of uranium, so when it comes to uranium-235, the half-life of it is 700 million years. So in about 700 million years, you'd expect half of the uranium 235 and something to have decayed into a different element, or into I think it's a different element that it would decay into. And then you can go the half-life of carbon-14, right? So if we bring that up, half-life of carbon-14, and the half-life of that is 5,730 years, which means that over 5,730 years, you'd expect half the carbon-14 in something to have decayed into, I think it's carbon-12 or carbon-13. I'm not sure exactly the...
Well, I won't call you out on that, because I don't,
Yeah.
I don't be an expert on all of the, you said there were isotopes. Now, I could concede this point, because what you showed me on Google here would make sense. But how can we possibly know a 1,000,000-year half-life? How can we measure something of 1,000,000 years? That seems impossible to me.
Because we can measure the decay rates. So when it comes, like if you've got a lot of uranium, particularly uranium-235, which is the one that says here, you'd be able to measure, okay, this particular one decays at this particular rate, and we know that when it comes to half-lives, these are, it's half over time, right? So if you measure the rate of a certain element measure the rate of decay of a certain element, you'll be able to find out that, okay, this decays at this particular rate.
I'm going to have to give you this, because I'm at this point, you're talking about things way above my head.
Fair enough.
Isotopes and
Fair.
half-lives.
Fair enough. Yeah. So, what's your next point? Well, hang on. What is your evidence for creationism in particular? Do you have any positive evidence for creationism?
I saw that title when I came on here when we talked about this. This debate was going to be about evolution. You didn't say we would actually be talking about creationism.
Well, when it comes to these things, this is the issue that I have with Flat Earth. And the issue that I have with Flat Earthers never bring up a model. So when it comes to evolution, you want to, when it comes to evolution and creationism, there's a fly or sandfly flying around. But when it comes to evolution versus creationism, there is one side has positive evidence. So evolution has positive evidence. And when you are arguing against something, it's nice to have a alternative to it, So when it comes to creationism, evolution is an alternative to that. However, when it comes to flat Earth, the globe Earth is an alternative to that. What is the alternative? What is the evidence for the alternative to evolution?
Well, at least we can both agree that flat Earth is completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'll say this: evolution. I see all the genetic evidence for evolution, and while I obviously don't understand all the details of it, I haven't seen anything convincing. I was watching great debate Conspiracy Cats did with Ray Comfort the other day.
Oh yeah, me too.
And was it that one? As I watched that one and the Kent Hovind debate, and I can't remember which one it was, but he kept bringing up ERVs, and
yep,
they things like that can easily be explained by a creator. Now again, I didn't want to go down that route because I wanted to focus on evolution this time around, but
okay, well, how can let's talk about ERVs, because ERVs are a great thing to talk about. How can that be easily explained by a creator? Or more specifically, how can creationism explain that better than evolution can?
Well, I don't think evolution can explain it.
Well, evolution does explain things like ERVs, because when it comes to ERVs, the more closely that we're related to something, like if we're related to something like a chimpanzee, then we will share more ERVs with a chimpanzee than we would something that we're more distantly related to.
But why do evolutionists presuppose that those ERVs came from a common ancestor instead of, for example, the same source?
Because these ERVs have no, why would you create things? Why would you create, if you were creating something like if you're a god and you're creating everything, why would you give ERVs that link humans with chimpanzees? Why would you put ERVs in the genetic code that would say, well, these look like they have a common ancestor? And just be like that doesn't make any sense. If I was creating something, I'd want things to look, I'd want things to be unique, even when it comes to things like ERVs. It doesn't make any sense why there'd be ERVs that in humans and...
We can't begin to understand why the creator would do things the way he did them. He is beyond our comprehension. Or she.
Well, when it comes to these things, I don't think you can just get away with saying, well, God is beyond our comprehension. I mean, sure, this could all be some fantastical thing that is the dream of a god, but it doesn't necessarily... But that's just an empty assertion at that point.
Could you elaborate on how it's an empty assertion?
Well, if you claim, oh, God did it, without providing particular evidence that God did it, then, that's not a good argument.
I think it's a plenty good argument if you understand. Now, remember, I didn't say God.
Yeah, well, I just assumed that you're going with something like God. So,
like I said, I wanted to keep this focused on evolution. I know how these things can get when it gets down to the detail of specific faith systems, and I don't want to see this devolve into what people like to call a dumpster fire.
Fair enough.
And yet, I forgot what I was saying before I went on that tangent.
I think we're talking about ERVs and how that relates to evolution, and whether it's more likely that a god did it, or not so much a god did it, but there was a creator for ERVs, or that was a process that was due to a common, or if that was something due to a common ancestor.
The common ancestor angle, it relies on the fossil record. Yes.
Not necessarily. We can look at particular genetics. I'm not sure if we can look at genetics in fossils. I think we can look at genetics in fossils and see that the genetics are the same, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But at least we can look at the genetics of us and our close relatives and see that, okay, these genes here are 99% similar.
Forgive me. Trying to gather my thoughts.
Okay.
I guess this is going to push me into more of creationism, or more of the specifics of creation than I wanted to get into in this debate. But if you want to talk about the fossil record, then I have to bring up the flood, and I know that's going to frustrate a lot of people, bringing up the flood. But we have plenty of evidence of the flood in rock layers and ice cores. I've seen plenty of articles, plenty of videos showing this.
Real quick, I do have to say, because this is diverging from the ERV point, so do you have any arguments for why an ERV is explained better with a creator rather than evolution?
Well, to put it bluntly, the creator created the ERVs and inserted them where he felt necessary, or she.
But why does that explain it better than we have a common ancestor?
Because the observable evidence of a common ancestor simply is not there.
But ERVs are really good evidence for a common ancestor. When it comes to ERVs, these can easily be explained with endogenous retroviruses, which have inserted themselves into the genetic material, and we can look at the particular places that they are in, right? And we can see that, okay.
But ERVs are evidence of ERVs as circular reasoning.
No, ERVs show that there's been particular insertions into the genetic code from an endogenous retrovirus, and these things are in the same place for humans and chimpanzees. in the code. They're in the same
That,
place.
that in itself does not point to a common ancestor. You need more than just what we see in present day.
But it does, though. If I had if I was photocopying something, right, and there was a splatter on the pages, and then I keep on photocopying it, and then when there's a splatter on the pages, and then after that, something else gets put on the pages. Maybe there's a photocopy error which changes some things, adds a line or something, right? And then I keep on photocopying that. We can look at them and say, well, these two things that are photocopied that both have the splotch on the pages were photocopied from a common source. Much like with ERVs, we can see that because we have endogenous retroviruses that are in the exact same position and have the exact same layout, we can see that, oh, these things must have come from a common ancestor.
But I think, again, you're using an analogy that just doesn't apply. You're talking about a photocopier.
Yeah, a photocopier, because, when it comes to humans, we're basically replicating our genetic material. Or when it comes to any creature, they're replicating their genetic material.
But that's way more complex than a photocopier.
But it's still
the analogy just doesn't.
But it's still an analogy. How is it different to how is it different to a photocopier?
That's a serious question.
I understand how it's physically different, but how does the photocopier analogy not hold up?
Because we're talking about the complexity of genetic material versus a copier throwing toner on a piece of paper.
Yeah, but an analogy is meant to simplify something down so that we can understand the argument there.
I think that simplifies it a bit too much.
Yeah, but
we might have to move on from this point too.
Yeah, but that's the point of an analogy, is to simplify it so that we can understand the exact argument being made in a different context. That's the point of an analogy.
I do understand that. I'm willing to concede that I'm simply not understanding your analogy, if that's the case.
Okay. But okay. Anyway, we'll move on to. You wanted to move on to. What's it's called? Something to do with fossils. I can't remember the flood.
I was kind of pushed towards the more details of creation.
Yep.
But the flood. If you want to talk about the fossil record, then I'll talk about the flood. It feels a bit cliche at this point after all the debates that have been done. For example, the ones I mentioned with Ken Hovind and Mr. Comfort. But I've seen the articles, I've seen the video showing evidence of a global flood in the rock layers and in ice cores. I mean, that's convincing right there. There are. This has been a long time ago, so this might not be correct, but I did see a special once on the History Channel, so there's some credibility to it, about whether a piece of the Ark was found in a mountain. I can't remember where it was. I'd have to look it up, but...
So, when it comes to
that one's not conclusive evidence, but
Yeah, so... Firstly, when it comes to the piece of the Ark that was found, I've heard about that. However, it seems like it's just something that looks like it could be an Ark, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it is an Ark. you'd have to have something that would be peer reviewed to say, oh, this is definitely an arc, rather than a TV show.
I'll concede that part, but I just thought it was interesting to bring up, something people can look into.
Yeah. As for the rock layers and ice cores, so what particular evidence is there? Like, I know you've brought them up, but how do they show that a flood has happened?
Let me see if I can find the article I was reading the other day. I should have come prepared with them up in my browser, but I didn't think we were focusing on the creation aspect, as I said before, because in our correspondence we were just going to be talking about evolution. But while I look this up, let's flip it to you.
Yeah.
I would bring up a point on evolution for us to talk about.
Well, I mean, we can bring up... What point did you bring up? Like, well, I could bring up something like, for example... Actually, I do want to ask you something whilst you're bringing that up. Can you define evolution real quick? Because some people are wanting you to do that in the chat.
Did you ask me if I could define evolution?
Yep.
But do you want a layman's definition or a detailed definition?
Something that scientific, that people that study evolution would probably agree with.
Adaptive change in I was going to say animals, but adaptive change in living things over time.
That's close enough. I wouldn't say adaptive, though. I'd say more of genetic change in organisms over time from a common ancestor. So that would incorporate things like the survival of the fittest, that kind of stuff. It would also incorporate mutations to produce genetic diversity and all that kind of stuff. Oh, one person says in populations. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. So, have you brought?
So what's evidence for evolution that of yours that we can talk about?
So I'd bring up chromosome 2. Have you heard of that?
I am not familiar with that. No.
Okay, so chromosome 2 is a chromosome that appears to have fused. When we look at chimps and humans, chimps have 2 extra chromosomes. One extra chromosome pair. And humans appear to not have that chromosome pair, but when we've actually looked, we've seen that we have a chromosome pair that is actually a lot bigger. This is chromosome 2. When it comes to chromosome 2, it appears as though it has fused together because we can look at the telomeres in the chromosome and see that it has telomeres in the middle of that chromosome, which would normally just be on the ends of the chromosome.
Okay.
So how is that not evidence for evolution? The chromosomes. Well, let me just. I just want to say.
I'm not saying this at all, but I have to ask: how is it evidence for evolution?
Yeah, I just realized.
I'm not.
Yeah, I just realized that I may not have stated a few things. So these chromosomes are very, very similar to the. If you were to break them apart, they would look like the ones that are in chimps, and they. So pretty much it looks like 2 chromosomes that were in a common ancestor have fused together.
And that's evidence of evolution because we display a chromosome that's similar to a chimpanzee's chromosomes, yet fused together. Am I understanding you correctly? I'm not mocking you. I'm just asking if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, we've got we've got one chromosome in us that looks like two chromosomes from chimpanzees have just fused together.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the theory of evolution doesn't state we evolved from chimpanzees, does it?
It states that we have a common ancestor.
Yes. So do we have a common ancestor whose chromosome we can look at to compare?
Well, we can't.
I want to at this point because that's what evolutionists always say: is no, we didn't come from monkeys. We didn't come from chimpanzees. We have a common ancestor, and if we're comparing a chromosome to a chimpanzee chromosome, I'm going to counter that with we did not evolve from chimpanzees. So
yeah, but
I want to push on that.
But going back to a certain, going back to the analogy, it would be like saying, oh, can we be sure that the Bible says this because all the translations of the Bible say this? You know, just because we don't have the original manuscripts to the Bible doesn't mean that we can't say, oh, they likely said this. So
I'd be inclined to agree on that one, actually.
Yeah. So when it comes to the genetic code, we can say, okay, well, this looks like a chimpanzee, or this looks like a chromosome from a chimpanzee having been fused together. They obviously have some differences, but it points to having a common ancestor because, you know, it looks like the same chromosome. Same chromosomes just fused together.
I think I finally understood one of your analogies. You may have had to bring up the Bible to do it, but I think I understand. I don't have an answer for that. That actually makes sense to me.
Okay, well.
That was strange.
You know, we'll get you believing in evolution in no time, mate.
I thought I had you on that one when you said chimpanzee, but no, your analogy actually helped me with that because of course, just because there are different translations of the Bible doesn't mean we can't know what what the Creator originally intended for us to know. But that's a good point. That's a good point. That's got me thinking. I having trouble finding the references to the rock layers and the ice cores. It was a while back that I saw them, so looking through my browser history was not helping. And trying to Google for it, I only got other like flood related pages. I can't seem to find. Maybe it was something on the History Channel again. I was watching and not reading when with the ice cores because I have a picture in my head of it, and it seems like it was something I was watching and not reading. So it's possible that's what I was. It was something I saw on the History Channel, but I can't seem to find it. So I will, unfortunately, rescind that argument. Since I cannot provide evidence for it at this moment.
Okay. So what argument do you want to get into next? Do you have anything else, or?
Well, I'd like to talk about the impact of evolution and it's the fact that that people insist on teaching it in schools when we don't have an observable, A to B of this theory of evolution. We don't. It seems to me like we're trying to, and I'm not going to use the word indoctrinating because that's the word everybody uses, and that seems dishonest to me. But it seems like we're trying to push a narrative that isn't fully supported, and we just want the children growing up to learn that narrative. I just realized that sounded like a flat Earth argument. So let me rephrase. It feels like we've jumped the gun, so to speak, because when I was taking science classes in school, I was taught evolution as fact. And yes, I understand what a scientific theory is, so I won't say it's just a theory, but I was taught evolution as fact. And finding out that we only have the fossil record and some genetics, which, I mean, you can interpret them many different ways, and many scientists have. I understand the consensus is one way, but it seems disingenuous to keep teaching this in schools when it could suddenly and easily change later on. And I'd like to ask if you have a defense isn't really the right word, but what your argument is to continue teaching it.
So I'd argue that the reason to keep on teaching it is because there hasn't been an alternative or a sound alternative provided that stands up to scientific scrutiny. When it comes to these things, if you want something to not be taught in school, you have to have an alternative which has a better explanation for the evidence than what is currently around. So, for example, if we were to take flat earthers would have to have a flat earth model if they wanted to be teaching their idea of the world in alternatively to the globe. And the same goes for evolution. Evolution is the best explanation that we have for the fossils, for genetic diversity, and what we see. If you wanted creationism to be taught, you'd have to have a creationism theory that explains things much better than what evolution theory does.
I'm hesitant to say, but there is the Bible.
Yeah, but the Bible doesn't actually provide a detailed theory for why there's ERVs. Just because a Bible exists doesn't mean that it shows that there's it doesn't show why there's ERVs in that we share with apes. It doesn't show why the fossil record dates back to millions of years. It doesn't explain all these things.
But I'd argue that evolution struggles to do so as well. And I'm not trying to say you're lying to me. And I'm also not trying to say that, evolutionary, biologists, I'm not saying they're lying either. And it just seems like they're relying on incomplete science. And I'll concede that the Bible doesn't have a solid, fully detailed, point by point explanation for these things. But the theory of evolution doesn't either. And I don't want to advocate teaching creation alongside evolution, because freedom of religion, freedom from religion, I understand both of those concepts. But at the risk of offending you and your audience, it seems like evolution gets to a point where it's treated like a religious belief. I'm not saying that's what you have. I don't want to offend you. I don't want to say you have a belief. It's a religion that you have. It just seems like that's where it's come to.
Well, first off, I think I should ask, how is it treated like a religious belief?
The text, evolutionary biology textbooks, for example. That's basically like the evolution Bible. That, like I said, the Bible may not have a point A, point B, point C breakdown of how everything happened, but neither does the theory of evolution. And to teach it like it does seems very religious to me. And again, I'm not criticizing that it's religious, believe me. It's the insistence on teaching that over creation, the insistence that to believe there's a creator and that the earth isn't billions of years old, that to insist that that's somehow stupid and uneducated and foolish, but to assert that the theory of evolution is true despite the fact that there are plenty of holes in it.
So
just like our biblical creation account does admittedly have holes in it, seems just as much of a religious action to do as it would be if I were to insist creation be taught in a school.
So when it comes to the whole, when it comes to textbooks, I'm not sure what you're saying there, because just because there's textbooks doesn't mean that it's religious, because one of the difference between the textbooks and the Bible, there's a key difference. The textbooks can be changed if the information in them has been found to be wrong. When it comes to the Bible, there's a lot of people that say that it's God's final word. And that's the huge difference between creationism and evolution, is that a lot of people advocating for creationism will say that the Bible is the account of creationism. In that case, you can't go beyond that unless you were to somehow find some way to, like maybe if God came down and talked to everyone and said that this is how he did it, then you'd have something new. But you can't get something new from creationism. From evolution, you can, because if something has been found to be wrong in evolution, then we say, okay, well, for example, Piltdown Man. That was an example of a hoax that was created by someone, and because it was found to be wrong, it was discarded.
I didn't understand what you said. Something man.
A Piltdown Man. That was an example of a hoax that was created by someone I think it was someone advocating for evolution, and they were saying that it was the missing link, but it was found that that was a hoax and that it was wrong.
How was I'm not familiar with that account. How was it shown that it was a hoax?
Well, the idea of Piltdown Man is that someone fabricated it and tried to pass it off as the missing link. Then, upon further investigation, it was found that it was a hoax. I'm not sure exactly how it was found that it was a hoax, but it's an example. I'm basically just using it as an example that where evolutionists have been wrong in the past and then changed their beliefs.
I understand that not everybody interprets the Bible the same way, but I won't, like Mr. Hovind, Dr. Hovind does, insist that the world is, or the earth is 6,000 years old. I won't commit to an age. I take more of the attitude that Mr. Comfort does. The Bible doesn't explicitly say how old the earth is. So if I could see more convincing evidence than the unreliable radio dating, if I could see more, if I could see something that could say, yes, definitely this is the age, like I would accept that. And that could fit into the creation account, because there is no, set, this is when it began. So I understand your argument that creationists and creationism tends not to accept new things, but I'm a little bit different. I think that it can be open to things that explain the creation account more.
Yeah, well, when it comes to things, I think that change is an important thing. So, getting back to the original point, the reason why I think that evolution should be taught in schools is because it has it has better explanatory power, and I don't think that things should just not be taught because people say that it's a belief. Because otherwise, a lot of things could be. Otherwise, there's a lot of things that people could say, well, that's just a belief, and that's not true, and then we wouldn't teach them. And sure, there's some things that I don't think can, like maths, for example, could never have that. However, I think that for things like history, people could say, well, history didn't actually happen. It's just your belief that it did happen. So we shouldn't teach history. I think that we should still teach things. And I've met people that think that atoms are fake and that it's just a belief. So I think that we shouldn't teach something just because people perceive it to be a belief.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't we literally have images of atoms from powerful microscopes?
Yeah, we do have. Well, it's not so much microscopes. It's more from there's certain techniques that they've used to image atoms, and there are people that I've heard of that think that these are bullshit. To put it bluntly.
Well, it's just silly.
Yeah, and I don't think that we should advocate, because this person believes that atoms don't exist, I don't think that we should advocate that we shouldn't be teaching things like chemistry. Right? We, just because someone thinks that, atoms don't believe... what?
I want to say I agree with you. That's why I'm interrupting.
Okay. And I think that the same thing can apply to evolution. Just because there's people that don't believe that evolution exists, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be teaching evolution. Now, one of the things that, if you wanted to say that evolution...
Can I make a point there?
Yeah?
Okay. Chemistry is an empirical science. You can point at something in chemistry and say definitively, this is this, this is that. Sorry if that sounds way too simple, but you can't do that with evolutionary biology. You're taking a lot of it on, please don't take offense to this. You're taking a lot of it on faith, as I would personally define faith. So I don't want to offend anybody by saying that. I don't want to imply that you are religious with evolution, but as I would define faith, you take a lot of it on faith in order to make sense of it.
Well, when it comes to this, I was going to bring up that there's a difference between evolution and something like creationism. If you didn't want evolution to be taught in school, the best way to do that would be peer-reviewed papers. And peer-reviewed papers that challenge evolution, that show, hey, evolution, there's these particular problems with evolution, and then if these papers were to be found to hold up to scrutiny, then you'd be able to say, well, because these papers that I've published hold up to scrutiny, then maybe we shouldn't be teaching evolution. However, that has not happened.
Give me one moment. I'm trying to find. You said peer-reviewed, and that reminded me of something. I don't want to say it out loud in case I can't find it again.
Fair enough. People are saying about faith. The definition that I use for faith is belief without evidence. What definition do you use for faith?
I almost gave you a definition that included the word faith in it. Uh, uh, faith is when you have faith in something. I
So,
wouldn't necessarily say belief because that can be pretty demeaning to someone who is basing their worldview on observation and evidence and not belief. So I would say faith is accepting something without having all of the evidence of it.
okay, I am going to actually say why I think that's a bad definition. Because all the evil, like saying that you don't have all the evidence of something is, it's very hard to get all the evidence of anything, right? So I can basically say, well, do you have all the evidence of gravity? Therefore gravity, no, therefore gravity doesn't exist. I don't think that's a good, or that therefore your belief in gravity is just based on faith. I think that there's, like, evidence is just something that supports a position. It doesn't, you can't have all the evidence for something, so.
But the idea of, say, a scientific theory, for example, is that you have enough testable and repeatable testable evidence to be certain about what that theory is.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. So when it comes to...
And yeah, I think you're about to answer the question I was going to ask. Continue.
Yeah, so when it comes to evolution, I think that there's enough evidence out there that we can say that it's that any unreasonable, or that any reasonable person would believe it if they were to look at all the evidence. There's, we can go through things, as we've already been through in this debate, there's ERVs, there's the fusion of chromosome 2, there is different types of dating that we can use, like radiometric dating. One of the things that I didn't actually...
For that chromosome 2, and I'll even look into ERVs more. Do you have any good resources for that, so I know what to look for?
Yeah, I'll be able to. I don't have them on hand. I should actually, though, but I can probably But I can probably just Google them. Chromosome 2.
Because I want to make sure that what I'm looking for is accurate, and I think you would have a better eye for that.
Yeah, I'll send you one from PBS on chromosome 2. It's a very short article. And then there is ERVs. Endogenous retrovirus insertions.
I've only got the one. Did you send both?
No, not yet. I've got to look up the endogenous. And I'll send you this one from Biomed Central. Endogenous retroviruses and evolution and disease. Yeah. It's a bit of reading, so I don't expect you to go through them right now.
Right. Yeah, I'll take a look at them after. Because, like I said, I am open to further evidence. That's most of the reason I came on here in the first place. Is to see if someone could provide me with convincing evidence. And it seems I have not been able to hold up my side of the argument so far.
So, Oh, one person just said the citations on Wikipedia are fine. Maybe I should have linked a Wikipedia article. I prefer to... I know that a lot of people actually diss Wikipedia, but I actually find Wikipedia to be a really good source, particularly because it has all the references down the bottom.
Right.
But, I often... Like, if I do use...
trouble through everything on there.
Yeah.
So I'd rather go, other sources.
Yeah, well, when I use Wikipedia, I generally take a look at the proper sources in Wikipedia. It annoys me when there's a particular line that doesn't have a source, and that particular line is the one that I want to use. That's so annoying. So, did you find what you're looking for, or?
No. So I'm just gonna let that go. I didn't find it.
Okay.
All right. So it says here we've been going for an hour.
Yeah.
And I've got reading material.
Well, I can end up now if you want. We'll just have to go through super chats and.
Honestly, I'd like to take a look at these and maybe come back on another time.
Yeah.
If you're okay with that.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed talking to you.
Okay. Well, we'll just go through super chats. I'll bring the super chat window over here. So we've got from Jessica G, who says first super chat for $2 and second, and she says that the third spot is hers as well. The third spot, and the fourth one is from Tusk and Peekapup. Well, thank you, Jessica G, for stealing the first four super chats, although saying that the fourth one is from Tusk and Peekapup. I'm sure Tusk and Peekapup will definitely appreciate that. And then Glass Monster for $2 Canadian says, Planet Walk, please may I join? And, well, when it comes to this particular debate, I decided to just keep it a friendly debate between me and Mike. Without having... You know how people dogpile debates sometimes when a lot of people disagree against one particular person. Everybody wants to get on, so I just decided to have it a one against one.
Appreciate that.
Citizen Gold for $5 New Zealand says, even if evolution is disproved, it still doesn't prove creationism. What would you say about that?
That is true. No, I agree with that. That is true.
Okay. I completely agree with that.
Creationism is a positive claim. We do have a burden of proof there.
Yeah. And Citizen Gold for $2 New Zealand says, before claiming God did it, you need to prove God. And I think that's why you stayed away from mentioning God specifically in this debate.
Correct.
Yep. So, and then MF for €5, I think it is, says, just support against morons. And thank you, MF. And...
Well, am I the moron?
What? Well, I think he's calling you a moron, but there's.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I do read out every super chat, so do forgive me if someone says something. If
I don't know how the super chat things work. That thing works. I don't blame you.
Okay, then Citizen Gold for $2 New Zealand. What's that?
His name is MF, right? So he's a bit of an MFer.
Maybe. I don't actually know what MF stands for. Because maybe that's what it means. But he can't actually type it into his name because then people would get offended. Or because maybe YouTube wouldn't allow it. I don't know. Citizen Gold for $2 New Zealand says, Mike, missed his name at the start, smiley face.
Yes, Mike above. As in, from the heavens above.
Okay.
Obviously not my real last name.
Yeah, and I'm assuming it doesn't mean that because you said that Flat Earth was silly or something, so I'm assuming it doesn't mean that you're from above the dome or anything on a Flat Earth.
No, dome, no. I do hope to be hopefully soon debating against a flat earther. I'm not gonna give any details because I haven't gotten confirmation on it yet. But I would like to debate against a flat earther yet, or would like to debate against a flat earther at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, we'll end up the stream there because where is it? There we go. End up. Oh, wrong thing. Outro. All right. So thank you everyone for joining me. This was a rather interesting debate, and hopefully I can have more of them in the future. I'll try to be better prepared in future ones, and hopefully refine my arguments a bit. But yeah,
I think you did fine.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for joining. I will see you in the next stream. Between you and me, thank you for watching. By the way, next week, I should actually say next week will be Rush of Stupid. So, and then a week after that, I'm actually not sure what I'll be doing. But we'll see. Between you and me, thank you for watching again. I need to get better at piano, to be honest.